I never thought that one night of kindness would completely unravel my marriage. It was late September, the kind of night when the air smells faintly like rain, even though the sky is clear, and I was already curled up on the couch with a blanket when my phone buzzed. It was my friend Lisa. We hadn't been especially close in the past few years, but we shared memories from college. Drunken late-night talks in dorm hallways, helping each other cram for finals, crying over silly boys. So when I saw her name on the screen, I felt a nostalgic tug. Her message was short: "Can I crash at your place tonight? Just for one night, I'll explain later." I hesitated. My husband Mark was already in bed upstairs, and I knew he valued his space, his routines. But something about the tone of her text, the urgency behind those words, made me answer yes. 10 minutes later, I was making up the couch for her, putting out one of our softer pillows and an extra quilt that smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener. When she arrived, her eyes looked red, like she had been crying in her car. She gave me a tight hug, almost desperate, and whispered thank you against my shoulder. I didn't ask too many questions, because I've been on the other side of nights like that, when all you want is to feel safe somewhere without telling your whole story. I made her tea, chamomile with honey, and we sat in the dim light of the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between us. She told me things were rough with her boyfriend, that she just needed a night to breathe, to not be there. I nodded, remembering the nights in my 20s when I would escape my tiny apartment just to sit in a diner for hours because it felt unbearable to be home. Mark came downstairs at some point, rubbing his eyes, his hair messy. He gave Lisa a polite smile and a little wave. "Hey, you're welcome to stay," he said, his voice still thick from sleep. I remember feeling grateful to him in that moment, thinking he was more understanding than I expected. We all sat at the table for a while, Lisa sipping her tea in silence, Mark drinking water, and me trying to lighten the mood by talking about stupid things like the neighbour's new dog or the broken mailbox down the street. Eventually, Lisa excused herself to the couch, and I went upstairs with Mark. In bed, I whispered an apology for the sudden guest, and he just shrugged. "It's fine. She seems nice," he said, before turning over and falling back asleep. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night, listening to the faint creak of the couch downstairs whenever Lisa shifted. I told myself it was just one night, that by tomorrow morning she would be gone and life would go back to normal. But deep down, something about the way she clung to me at the door, the way Mark had looked at her a second too long when she walked into the kitchen, unsettled me. I pushed it aside, convincing myself I was overthinking. That was my mistake. The next morning I woke up early, out of habit, and padded down the stairs in my slippers, expecting to find Lisa gone. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that wasn't even hers to pour. Mark must have made it for her, because I knew she didn't know where we kept the filters, or which cabinet held the mugs. The sight made me pause in the doorway. She looked so comfortable, hair tied up messily, wearing one of my old hoodies I'd left folded on the arm of the couch. She smiled at me like it was the most natural thing in the world, and for a moment I tried to convince myself it was fine. Friends borrow clothes, friends drink each other's coffee. Nothing strange about that. Mark walked in right after me, already dressed for work, and said, "Morning, ladies," with a cheerfulness I wasn't used to before his first meeting of the day. He kissed me quickly on the cheek, then laughed at something Lisa said under her breath. I couldn't even catch the words, but they both laughed, and it felt like I had missed the beginning of a joke. The day went on. Lisa didn't leave. She said her boyfriend hadn't answered her calls, and she didn't feel safe going back yet. I tried to be supportive, told her she could stay one more night if she needed to. I remembered how many times she had once listened to me cry about guys who didn't deserve my tears. But still, I felt this strange tightness in my chest. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard their voices downstairs. Not flirty, not inappropriate, just close. Talking in low tones, laughing occasionally. When I came down, they were in the living room. Lisa showing him some video on her phone. They both looked up at me like I'd walked in on something private, though nothing about their posture was guilty. We were just laughing at this dog video, Lisa explained quickly, handing me the phone. And there it was, just a golden retriever wearing sunglasses. Silly, harmless. Still, I couldn't shake the way my stomach flipped. At dinner, I tried to reclaim my space, pulling Lisa into my stories about college days, reminding her of inside jokes only the two of us could understand. For a while, it worked. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine, and I saw Mark looking at us with curiosity. Maybe even admiration, like he was rediscovering a side of me he'd forgotten. But as the night wound down, she didn't even hint about leaving. She settled into the couch again, tucked under my quilt like she belonged. When I climbed into bed beside Mark, I asked softly, "Do you mind her staying another night?" He yawned and said, "Not at all. She's been through something. It's good we can help." He meant it, I think. At least in that moment. I tried to convince myself it was fine, that this was just compassion. But when I closed my eyes, all I could picture was Lisa at my kitchen table that morning, sipping coffee from my favourite mug, like she had always been here. By the third day, I was starting to feel like a guest in my own house. Lisa was still there, her suitcase tucked neatly beside the couch, though she never actually opened it in front of me. It was like she wanted to pretend she hadn't intended to stay, even though her presence was stretching out longer and longer. That morning, I came downstairs and found her cooking breakfast. She was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes in one of our pans, the smell of butter and maple syrup already filling the kitchen. Mark sat at the table with a plate in front of him, grinning like a kid as she set another pancake down. I froze for a moment, staring at the scene. This was my kitchen, my husband, my morning routine, and yet somehow I wasn't in it. "I hope you don't mind," she said brightly when she saw me. I thought I'd thank you guys by making breakfast. I forced a smile, said it was fine, but inside I felt replaced. All day little things piled up. She knew where the spare towels were, where the extra toothpaste was, even where I kept the baking soda in the pantry. Details I hadn't shown her. I wondered if Mark had. At one point, I came into the living room and found them bent over a laptop together. He was showing her something from work, and she was leaning close, her hand resting casually on his shoulder, as if it was the most natural thing. They didn't even notice me at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But when I stepped into the room, Mark jumped slightly, like I'd interrupted a moment. That evening, I tried to talk to Lisa privately. I asked her gently if she thought she might be able to go back to her place soon, or maybe stay with another friend. She frowned, looked down at her hands and whispered, "I just don't feel safe there yet. Please, just a few more days." Her voice cracked in a way that made me feel guilty, like I was abandoning her. So I nodded, even though my throat was tight. Later that night, lying in bed next to Mark, I told him I was worried. "It's just temporary," he said. "She clearly needs support. You're being a good friend." But I didn't feel like a good friend. I felt like I was losing something, some invisible line being crossed. That night I dreamed of coming downstairs and finding Lisa sitting in my chair, wearing my robe, drinking from my glass, her hand resting on Mark's. When I woke up, my chest hurt from the weight of it. I tried to brush it off as silly jealousy, but deep down I knew something was shifting, and not in my favour. On the fourth day, I came home from work and the house smelled like garlic and basil. At first, I thought Mark had surprised me by cooking dinner, which he almost never did. But when I walked into the kitchen, it was Lisa at the stove again. She was wearing one of my aprons, the one with little sunflowers printed on it, and humming along to music playing softly from her phone. Mark was leaning against the counter, sipping wine, looking relaxed in a way he rarely did on weekdays. They both turned toward me at the same time, smiling as if I was the one intruding. "We thought we'd make dinner tonight," Lisa said, gesturing toward the pan of pasta sauce bubbling on the stove. I forced a smile but couldn't ignore the sharp sting in my chest. It wasn't just that she was cooking in my kitchen, wearing my apron, serving my husband. It was the way they looked at each other. Easy, familiar, as though they'd been sharing these little moments all along. At dinner, they sat across from me, talking and laughing about music, about some show I hadn't seen, and I felt like I was watching a play where I didn't know my lines. I kept glancing at Mark, waiting for him to pull me into the conversation, but his attention stayed locked on her. Later that night, when I started clearing dishes, Lisa insisted on helping. She stood shoulder to shoulder with me at the sink, drying plates, acting like nothing was unusual. She told me she was so grateful to me, that she didn't know what she would have done without my kindness. Her words sounded sincere, but her eyes lingered on the hallway, where Mark had just disappeared. When I finally went upstairs, I found Mark sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone. I asked him straight out, "Do you think it's weird she's still here?" He shrugged, barely looking up. "She's going through something. It's not a big deal. Besides, she's been helping out, cooking and everything. It's kind of nice." That word, nice, echoed in my head all night. Nice for him, maybe, but I felt suffocated. I lay awake listening to the faint sound of the TV downstairs, knowing Lisa was still up, still awake under the same roof as us. It hit me then that she wasn't just staying, she was settling in. And somehow Mark didn't mind. By the fifth day, my patience was stretched so thin I could feel it fraying with every small detail. I came into the living room after work and found Lisa curled up on the couch with one of Mark's sweaters draped around her shoulders. It wasn't just any sweater, it was the one I'd given him last Christmas. Navy blue with little specks of white, the one he wore on our trip to the mountains when we took photos by the fire. Seeing it on her made something inside me twist. She glanced up and said casually, "Oh, Mark let me borrow this, it's so warm." I wanted to scream, but instead I just nodded. Later that evening, I noticed she had moved her things. Her suitcase wasn't beside the couch anymore. It was tucked neatly into the corner of the guest room. She hadn't asked, she just decided. When I confronted her gently, saying, "I thought this was temporary," she sighed like I was being unreasonable. "It is temporary. I just needed a little more space than the couch." "I hope that's okay." Before I could answer, Mark came in, already siding with her without even hearing my words. "It's fine. She'll be more comfortable there," he said, as if I were being selfish for even questioning it. That night at dinner, the two of them started talking about movies, debating which one was better, laughing at each other's impressions. I sat there pushing peas round my plate, invisible in my own home. Afterward, I tried to talk to Mark privately. I told him I felt pushed aside, that Lisa's presence was starting to change the atmosphere between us. He frowned, told me I was overreacting. "She's your friend. We're just helping her out. Don't make it into something it's not." His words stung because they carried a tone of dismissal, like my feelings were nothing more than paranoia. But I couldn't shake the way Lisa looked at him sometimes, or the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her. That night in bed, I lay awake, replaying old memories. Mark holding my hand when we first moved into this house. Lisa and I laughing together on our college road trip, singing loudly to the radio with the windows down. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, like I was slipping out of my own story. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I realised with a sinking feeling that Lisa wasn't leaving anytime soon. By the 6th day, I couldn't deny it anymore. Lisa was no longer a guest. She was a fixture in the house. She had slipped so easily into our routines that sometimes I felt like I was the outsider. That morning, I came downstairs to find her and Mark sitting at the kitchen table, both with their laptops open, coffee mugs beside them, chatting while they worked. It was the kind of domestic scene I used to imagine for Mark and me, side by side, comfortable and productive. But instead, it was her in my seat, her laughter filling the kitchen. She even corrected him on something, teasing him about a typo in his presentation, and he grinned at her like it was the funniest thing. I tried to join them, poured myself some coffee, but the conversation flowed around me like a current I couldn't catch. Later, when I went to grab some laundry, I noticed Lisa had mixed her clothes with ours. A pair of her jeans was draped over the drying rack next to my dresses. Her socks were folded neatly in the basket. It was such a small thing, but it made my stomach churn. That evening, I suggested maybe we all go out for dinner, trying to reclaim a bit of normalcy. At the restaurant, Lisa slid into the booth next to Mark before I could, leaving me on the other side of the table. They shared appetizers, exchanged bites from their plates, laughed about old stories from college that I barely remembered. I felt like the third wheel on my own date. On the drive home, I stared out the window, gripping the seatbelt, fighting the urge to cry. When we got back, Lisa went straight to the guest room, humming softly, while Mark disappeared into the bathroom. I sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. I looked tired, smaller somehow, like I was fading in the background of my own life. When Mark finally joined me, I asked him again if he thought this was normal. "She's going through a hard time," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Can't you just be supportive instead of making it about you?" That cut deep, because hadn't I been the one who opened the door for her that night? I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed the words I wanted to say. Instead, I turned off the lamp and lay in silence, listening to Mark's breathing beside me, and wondered how long it would take before Lisa stopped pretending this was temporary. On the 7th day, I realised Lisa wasn't just staying. She was blending into Mark's life in ways I couldn't. That morning I walked into the kitchen and found them cooking breakfast together. Mark was chopping vegetables while Lisa stood next to him at the stove, both of them moving in sync like they'd done this 100 times before. When Mark saw me, he smiled quickly and said, "We're making omelettes. Want one?" His tone was casual, but it stung because he hadn't cooked breakfast with me in months. I sat down at the table, trying to act normal, but my hand shook slightly as I sipped my coffee. Lisa slid a plate in front of me, cheerful as ever, as if she didn't notice the tension. Throughout the day, I noticed little things that unsettled me more than outright arguments ever could. She had started using Mark's favourite mug, the one with the chipped handle. He never let anyone else touch. She was leaving her phone charger plugged in by his side of the couch, and when I opened the fridge, I saw she'd written her own grocery list on the whiteboard we kept for the week's meals. She had added things like almond milk and a specific brand of yogurt she liked, and Mark had already checked some of them off. That night, I finally snapped. After Lisa went to bed, I confronted Mark. My voice trembled as I told him I felt erased, like she was sliding into spaces that belonged to me. He sighed heavily, rubbed his face, and said, "You're imagining things. She's just grateful. Don't make her feel unwelcome." I wanted to scream that I wasn't imagining it, that I could see the way his eyes softened when she spoke, the way she touched his arm without hesitation. But the words caught in my throat because deep down I was afraid he'd deny it again. And then where would I be? Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and thought back to the first time Lisa and I met. We'd been paired together in a freshman English class project, both nervous and awkward, and by the end of the semester we were inseparable. She was the friend I told everything to, my crushes, my fears, even the moment I knew I was falling for Mark. And now here she was, sleeping in my house, her laughter echoing down the hallway, where I once felt safe. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but all I could feel was the steady, growing ache of betrayal, pressing in on all sides. By the 8th day, I started noticing how the balance in the house had shifted. It wasn't just that Lisa was still there, it was that she was comfortable, like she belonged more than I did. I came home from work and the living room smelled like Mark's cologne. At first I thought he must have just sprayed it before leaving. But then I saw Lisa lounging on the couch, wrapped in one of his hoodies. It wasn't subtle anymore. She looked up at me, gave a casual smile and said, "Hope you don't mind. I borrowed this, it's so soft." I managed a stiff nod, but inside my stomach turned. That night at dinner, I tried to reclaim some ground by telling a funny story from my job. Usually Mark would chuckle, maybe add a comment, but this time his eyes kept drifting toward Lisa. She laughed at my story louder than he did, as if she wanted to prove she was on my side. But the way Mark looked at her told me she was already winning something I hadn't agreed to compete for. After dinner, I went to load the dishwasher and overheard them in the living room. They weren't whispering exactly, but their voices were low, intimate. Lisa was telling him about her ex, how unsafe she felt, and I heard Mark say, "You don't have to worry anymore. You're safe here. Safe, in my house, with my husband." The words cut like glass. When I walked in, they both straightened quickly, like kids caught doing something wrong, though technically nothing had happened, at least nothing I could point to. I felt crazy, like I was spinning inside my own life. Later that night, I tried again to talk to Mark. I asked him if he thought it was healthy for Lisa to stay this long, if maybe she needed to find another arrangement. His jaw tightened. "She needs us," he said firmly. "Stop acting like she's a burden." That word, burden, stung worse than I expected. Because hadn't I been the one who opened the door that first night? I crawled into bed later, tears stinging my eyes, and remembered our wedding day. Mark had looked at me with so much warmth, his hands trembling when he slid the ring on my finger. I held on to that memory like a lifeline, but lying there in the dark, listening to the faint creak of the guest room floorboards, I couldn't ignore the truth. That warmth I once believed was mine alone. He was starting to share it with her. By the 9th day, the walls of my own home felt strange to me. Like every picture frame and every shadow had been rearranged just slightly to remind me I no longer had control. I noticed Lisa's toothbrush in the bathroom, placed right next to mine and Mark's, as if she was part of this family. Her perfume lingered in the hallway, a sweet floral scent that wasn't mine, clinging to the air after she passed. It was unbearable how natural she made it all look. That evening, I came home to find them on the porch. Mark was fixing the loose hinge on the screen door while Lisa stood nearby, handing him tools from the little red box he always kept under the sink. She laughed at something he said, and he looked up at her with a smile that twisted my insides. It wasn't just politeness. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he feels understood, when he feels admired. And it used to be mine. When they noticed me, Lisa waved cheerfully and said, "We finally got this door fixed," as if it was some joint accomplishment. My voice caught, but I managed a thank you before heading straight inside, trying to hide the heat in my eyes. At dinner, the tension was so thick I could barely swallow. Lisa and Mark talked about cooking a new recipe together later in the week. I set my fork down and asked directly, "Lisa, Do you have a plan? Somewhere you're going after this? Her face tightened, then softened with a practiced sadness. I'm working on it, she said, glancing quickly at Mark. It's just not safe yet. And there he was again, rushing to her defense before I could say another word. Stop pressuring her. She'll leave when she's ready. I wanted to scream that it wasn't her decision to make, that this was my house too, but the words died in my throat when I saw his eyes. Sharp, protective, but not for me. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked quietly downstairs and found the guest room door slightly open, the light spilling into the hallway. I heard the soft murmur of voices, Mark's voice, Lisa's laughter, low and intimate. I froze in the darkness, my heart pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. I didn't dare step closer, didn't dare push the door open, because part of me already knew what I would find. I crept back upstairs, my legs shaking, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty side where Mark should have been. The silence in that moment was louder than any confession, and it was then I realised. She wasn't just visiting anymore, she was replacing me piece by piece, and Mark was letting it happen. By the 10th day, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage where I was forced to watch a play, written without me. The smallest details screamed at me. Lisa's shoes lined up neatly next to ours by the front door. Her scarf draped over the chair in the hallway. Her laughter echoing at the living room like it belonged there. That morning I found her cooking again. Only this time she was wearing one of my aprons that I kept folded in the pantry for baking days. She spun around when she heard me, spatula in hand, and said, I hope you don't mind. I just thought I'd make pancakes for all of us. Mark was sitting at the table already, sipping coffee, watching her like she was some kind of miracle. I joined them, silent, trying to ignore the burn in my throat. Lisa placed a plate in front of me, and I forced myself to smile, but every bite tasted like cardboard. Later in the afternoon, I overheard them planning a grocery run together. Grocery shopping was our ritual. Mark and I used to go every Saturday morning, teasing each other about what snacks to buy, laughing in the frozen foods aisle. Now I stood at the top of the stairs, listening to them debate brands of cereal, like it was their shared tradition. They came back an hour later with bags full of things Lisa liked. Her yogurt, her tea, her favourite chips. My staples were buried at the bottom. When I tried to bring it up to Mark, he cut me off. She's a guest. Stop making it about you. The words slapped me harder than I expected. That night at dinner, Lisa told a story from college I had forgotten, about a night we all went to a party where the power went out. She and Mark laughed together at the memory, filling in details I didn't even remember, as though I wasn't part of it at all. I stared down at my plate, remembering how I once thought of Lisa as a sister. She was the one I called after my first real heartbreak. The one who sat on my dorm floor eating takeout with me when I cried over Mark, the first time he almost broke things off. And now here she was, in my house, in his life, in my place. That evening I finally snapped. After Lisa went to her room, I told Mark I couldn't take it anymore. My voice shook as I asked him point blank if something was happening between them. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then said, You're being paranoid. She needs us. Why are you turning this into something ugly? I wanted to shout, to claw the denial out of him, but instead I stood there in the silence, my body trembling, because the way he looked at me wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was pity. And pity is worse than hate, because it means they already think you've lost. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the guest room light under the door across the hall. The walls felt closer than ever, the air heavy with something unspoken, and I realised then that the life I had built, the marriage I had trusted, was slipping away in whispers and laughter I wasn't invited to share. By the 11th day, I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The lines that once defined my marriage, my friendships, even my identity, were blurred until I barely recognised where I ended and Lisa began. That morning, I went to grab a sweater from the closet and noticed half the space was filled with clothes that weren't mine. Dresses, jackets, even shoes I had never seen before, all Lisa's, hanging neatly next to Mark's shirts as though she had always belonged there. My heart sank to my stomach. I confronted her in the hallway, my voice trembling but sharp. "Why are your things in my closet?" She blinked at me, feigning innocence, and said, "Oh, Mark said there was extra space. I didn't want to clutter the guest room." It wasn't just the words, it was the casual way she said his name, like he had given her permission to occupy my life. I stormed into the kitchen afterward, desperate to talk to Mark, but he was already sitting at the table with Lisa, both of them hunched over his laptop, laughing at something on the screen. When I demanded an explanation, he sighed heavily, rubbed his temples and said, "You're making everything harder than it needs to be. Can't you just accept that she's here for now? For now." Those two words cut deeper than any confession, because for now had stretched into nearly 2 weeks, and there was no sign of her leaving. That evening we sat down to dinner, the three of us, but I barely touched my food. Lisa dominated the conversation, telling stories about her ex, about her struggles, and Mark hung on every word. I tried to add something once, but Mark cut me off gently, turning the conversation back to her. It was like I had become invisible. After dinner, Lisa poured Mark another glass of wine, her hand brushing his as she handed it over, and he didn't pull away. My chest tightened until I thought I couldn't breathe. Later that night, I decided to test them. I pretended to go to bed early, shutting the bedroom door softly. But instead of sleeping, I crept back out and stood at the top of the stairs. From the living room, I heard their voices, low, intimate, comfortable. Then came the sound of laughter, followed by silence so thick it made my skin crawl. I couldn't bring myself to go down, couldn't face the truth I already felt in my bones. I returned to bed, my body shaking, my pillow wet with silent tears. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who trusted her best friend blindly, the one who believed her husband's love was unshakable. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone who lay dark, listening to betrayal grow roots in the walls of her own home. And I knew that by the next day, something inside me would have to break. Either I would fight or I would lose everything. On the 12th day, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The fear, the doubt, the constant second-guessing of myself had burned out, leaving only anger and something sharper. Resolve. When I went downstairs, I found Lisa at the kitchen counter, pouring herself coffee from the pot I had brewed. She was barefoot, wearing one of Mark's old t-shirts, and humming softly as if this was her house, her life. Mark walked in a moment later, smiling at her, before even glancing at me. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I set my mug down on the table, with a force that made them both look at me. My voice shook at first, but I didn't back down. "Enough," I said. "This ends today. Lisa, you need to leave." She froze, her eyes wide, then softened into that practiced sadness I had seen so many times before. "But I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, glancing at Mark for backup. And he opened his mouth, ready to defend her again, but I cut him off. "No, you don't get to decide this, Mark. This is my house, my life, and I will not stand here and watch you both erase me piece by piece." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock. For a moment, I thought he might argue, that he might choose her over me right there. But instead, he said nothing. He looked at her, then at me, and for the first time I saw guilt flicker in his eyes. Lisa tried again, her voice trembling. I thought we were friends, and that was when I finally let out everything I had been holding in. Friends don't move into your home and wear your husband's clothes. Friends don't sit at your table and push you out of your own life. Whatever we had, you destroyed it the moment you decided to take what wasn't yours. She stared at me, her lips pressed tight, and for once she had no words. She left that afternoon. Her suitcase dragged down the hallway with a dull thud. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed through the whole house. Mark stood in the kitchen, silent, watching me. I didn't look at him. I went upstairs into our bedroom and began pulling my own things into a bag. He followed me, confused, asking what I was doing. I turned to him, tears burning in my eyes, but my voice steady. I opened the door for her, but you let her stay. And that told me everything I needed to know about us. I zipped the bag and walked past him, my heart pounding, my body shaking, but lighter somehow. Because for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I felt like myself again. Leaving wasn't easy. It meant tearing down a life I had built for years, but staying would have meant erasing myself completely, and I wasn't willing to let them finish what they had started. I don't know what happened between them after I left. Maybe they stayed together, maybe it all fell apart. But I do know this: kindness should never cost you your own dignity. And opening my door that night was the mistake that showed me exactly how strong I really am. Because sometimes the only way to reclaim your life is to walk away from the people who thought they could live it without you.